guys, welcome back to Chappelle. Welcome back to it in this condensed flip environment. That's right, we're keeping it to 15 minutes again, all right? I like these little chunks and stuff like that. I like what we're doing, but let's not dawdle. Let's get after it, right? Let's pick right up where we left off in class when we were talking about how do you attack in a trench warfare situation, right? By the way, if you feel like I'm going a little bit too fast in this flip whatsoever, if you need to come circle back around with me and check in or something like that, you know, you're more than welcome to. The number one thing about it, though, is if you need to pause and jot some stuff down and then write what I'm saying, that is completely fine. I think it'll be a good strategy for these upcoming series of flips. But speaking of strategies, how do you fight in a trench warfare, right? What do you do if you're in a stalemate and you're not winning and you're not losing and you're having a Christmas truce left and right and stuff like that? What are you supposed to do? Well, we talked about it in class a little bit, right? We talked about artillery and bombardments, using these large artillery cannons to try and lob shells up and over the trenches, up and over no man's land, and into your enemy's area, right? Now, the other big strategy that they actually used as well, which was one of the dumbest things that's ever existed, and it actually is because of the fact that a lot of these old generals and stuff like that thought that, you know, like charges would be the way to end this war, because that's how Napoleonic wars were fought for so long. They had a thing called going over the top, where literally a officer would pick up a whistle and be like, all right, and then everybody would get up out of their trench, run past their own barbed wire, and try to jump down into the enemy's trench, right? Well, the thing about it is, y'all, is these trenches are chaotic and scary and intense, and we looked at a bunch of them in class and stuff like that, and they were constructed in these really aggressive and insane manners and stuff like that, and they were actually in these little zigzags. They weren't necessarily a straight line. So the thing about these little zigzags is, like, somebody could be hiding on the other side of that thing, and if you try to get in your enemy's trench, they're there and they're waiting for you. And really quickly, why do you think they were built in these zigzag-like construction? Really quickly, though, write down zigzag, question mark. Why do you think they were built like that in zigzags and stuff like that? Reason why is to avoid explosions. If a grenade dropped into your trench or something like that, you could just go around the corner and avoid being blown up, right? So, like, that's a big reason why. And also, if somebody stormed into your trench, you just had to go around the corner, wait for them, camp there. Any Call of Duty fans out there, camp out and then take them out then, right? The thing about it, though, is that these wars and this type of strategy is going to lead to massive human cost of lives, right? Millions will die in this war because of this idea of aggressively attacking, okay? To break the stalemates, both sides, Central and allies, are going to attack very aggressively using artillery bombardments and aggressive over-the-top charges. Now, this is going to be particularly in 1914 to 1915, before the technology of this war really gets kicked in. And this is stupid, right? This is crazy. The fact of the matter is that you just kept throwing human lives at one another, thinking it would eventually break this stalemate. Now, there are several big battles that show us this, right? You don't need to write down the big battles. It's just something we're going to talk about really quick, okay? You don't need to write down the big battles. What did I just say? You don't need to write this down. Don't mute me. Don't do it. The thing about it, though, is when we're looking at it, you got the Battle of the Somme, which is where the very first tanks actually rolled in World War I in 1916, and over 1 million lives were lost in a span of about 5 hours, right? 1 million people dead in 5 hours at one giant battle because of new technologies, over-the-top strategy, and also because of, like, literally bombarding a bunch of barbed wire hoping it wasn't going to be there, right? Verdun, you're going to have 500,000 killed or missing in action. The Third Battle of Ypres, also known as Passchendaele, where these troops were slogging through the mud and the muck, because literally as trench warfare continues, it's going to destroy no man's land, and it's just going to be this massive sludge, this disgusting ooze of stuff that is going to literally slow you down incrementally. And at Passchendaele was the absolute worst. They had accounts of soldiers drowning in the mud when they tried to storm over no man's land, right? Also, at the Second Battle of Ypres, thousands will die from a poisonous gas attack, right? Now, as you can tell, World War I is just going to get more chaotic, more violent, more technologically savvy, and even more scary as time goes on. To give you an image of how destructive this war was, this is a small city in northern France who at the start of the war, this is what it looked like after the war was over. Look at the craters. The entire town was completely destroyed by artillery bombardments over the course of the war. That right there is Passchendaele, the one where the soldiers died drowning in the mud. That's a poison gas attack. And of course, that is no man's land, right? No man's land, this chaotic mess and sludge of an area that no one dared go into, because if you did, you're done, and you will be no man out there anymore, right? Neither side won an advantage after any of these this you need, okay? After these costly battles like Passchendaele, the Somme, Second Battle of Ypres, all this stuff, nobody actually even won an advantage. This war was becoming what is known as a war of attrition, right? Now, a war of attrition is a really, really important term that you'll actually use when you talk about this next year in U.S. history, when you talk about the Civil War and things like that. Wars of attrition during this time period, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, were fairly common, right? It's the idea that the war focuses on starving out the other side, right? You're going to keep fighting each other until somebody runs out of supplies and they just don't have the will to fight anymore, right? You're going to keep fighting this until the Allies or the Central Powers just don't even have enough food to feed their military, right? Which is literally an aggressive strategy that the British are going to use against the Germans. They're actually going to blockade their ports and try to force them into hunger riots, which actually worked, right? And also new technologies are going to be out in this war. This you need. This you really, really need. So to try and break these stalemates that are going on during this time period, new technology is going to be used for this war that had never been seen before, right? New technologies that include machine guns, and I don't think we need to talk about the Maxim gun anymore. We talked about it 1,000 times, had a water jacket on it and stuff like that. Artillery shells, we talked about that a lot in class the last few days. Now, grenades were a really interesting one because literally these small improvised explosive, well, not improvised, these small anti-personnel explosive devices were very, very much used in different different strategies and stuff like that. For example, this actually right here is a German grenade from World War I because literally it was called a potato masher and it was designed in this way so they could throw it further, right? But this is an American grenade right there, and it's funny because Americans apparently when they finally do come into this war can throw a grenade further than anybody else because so many of our sports had to do with throwing a ball, like football or baseball or those of the like, right? So actually ours are much more called pineapple grenades. They're actually called that because they look kind of like a pineapple, and we would be able to have a handheld and just go, all right, downfield, boom, and it's basically like my football every single day. So you are just training for war, throwing grenades every single day, right? Now, another big one that's going to come out as well is poison gas, right? Now, poison gas is going to be outlawed after World War I because it was so tragic and so disgusting. And we'll talk about a couple of the different types like chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas, and stuff like that in class when we're reviewing during our warm-up. Tanks are going to be a massive thing as well. Airplanes, submarines, so Zeppelins, and even messenger dogs and pigeons would be actually used in this war, right? This right here, by the way, is a Zeppelin, if you don't know what it is. A Zeppelin is a very large blimp that was used for bombing raids. This right here, of course, gas and gas masks are going to be really, really big. That's actually a horse gas mask. That horse looks terrified. And these are dogs wearing gas masks and stuff like that. Now, look, the big thing about it, though, as well, is this is one of the scary ones. Kaylee Dubbin brought this up in class today. Why don't you just dig a trench forward into no man's land? Well, guess what, Kaylee? They did. Landmines were actually planted underneath no man's land using tunnels, right? And every now and again, sometimes these tunnels would meet and men would actually fight each other underground. If you've ever seen Peaky Blinders, it's a show that's actually on Netflix. Thomas Shelby, one of the main characters in it, actually fights a guy underground and has like a flashback in his PTSD moments. This right here also was the largest artillery shell artillery gun that was ever made. It's called Big Bertha. It was made by the Germans. Could fire over a mile. And then, of course, airplanes are going to be a very, very big thing as well going into this war that we will talk about a little bit more in class. Now, they were originally used for reconnaissance, and also looking at the design of these planes, big thing to remember about this is they did not have but one, but they had two wings on them. Actually, they were called biplanes and stuff like that, okay? And we'll talk more about how they were used and stuff like that in class a little bit, but let's go ahead and jump over to our other Prezi that we're going to be using, and let's talk a little bit about how this war is going and how it's affecting people at home and in other areas as well, right? What has basically happened is this war has descended into what is known as total warfare, right? So 1914 is going to be the beginning of World War I. By 1915, this war has actually been we have gone past Christmas. We're now in the summer of 1915, and the countries that are involved in this war, both Central and Allies, are realizing that to only win this war, we must put our country's entire focus and resource into the war, right? For example, what we mean by total warfare is every product that is being made by a company inside your country, it's going to the war effort, right? Like, let's say, hypothetically speaking, in some of our classes, you got a, young lady, let's say we're going to use, we got, Elena Savage, right? And Elena Savage, makes, dresses and stuff like that before the war happens. Not anymore, Elena. Now your shop is going to be making uniforms to go towards the military, right? Let's say, hypothetically, Brianna Fonseca used to make cast iron skillets and sell those. Not anymore, Brianna. You're making bullets now in your factory, and they're going to the war effort, right? That's total war. Speaking of total war as well, men are also not deciding to go to this war anymore. They're being forced to. The draft is being used to bring soldiers in, right? They're beginning to run out of men at the front line, so the countries are beginning to force them to go using conscription, aka the draft. draft. You would receive a small card in the letter, or like in the mail, that actually just said, go to your local recruiting office and join up for the war effort. You have been called up, right? The other thing about it that you need to understand as well is that war is very expensive. So other things on the home front are going to happen, like taxes are going to increase to help pay for the war. And another large thing as well is rationing is going to occur. Now, rationing is where literally these countries during this war, particularly in Europe at this point, would actually issue a set of cards, right? And would tell you how much of certain things you could buy in a week, right? You were limited on how much meat you could buy, dairy products, or anything like that, because they had to conserve as much as they possibly could to send it to the war effort, right? This right here, for example, is an American campaign poster by 1917. Of course I can. I'm patriotic, and ration points won't worry me, right? The idea is like, oh, she is canning food at her house to save it over a long period of time, so she doesn't have to go buy more because she has to ration the food. We are saving you, so you need to save what? Save food, right? The idea about this, though, is how do you win then, right? If you're rationing and you're in a total war, how do you win a war of attrition? What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to win a war where you're basically just trying to starve the other resource out, right? Well, you can't ration your own food so you can keep your own supply up, but how do you make sure the other side runs out of things first, right? Well, the idea is going to be blockades, okay? Adopted by the British, particularly in the early phases of the war, they are going to use their large dreadnoughts to try and blockade German ports, right? Now, Germany only has a very small strip of area in the north that actually even has access to port cities whatsoever, because Denmark is actually right above them. Now, in the northern area of Germany, there's a small area of ports, and what the British are going to do is they're going to set up a blockade over it in the North Sea. Now, to try and stop this and get back at them and try to be like, look, get your blockade out of here so we can bring food in, so we can feed the normal people, the civilians of Germany, the Germans are going to use their submarines to blockade the Brits and also use those Unterseebooten to sink dreadnoughts like it's going out of style. Now, we're going to talk about those things here in about a couple minutes as well. We're going to talk about unrestricted submarine warfare, right? It's going to be very, very important. Now, the Germans are going to use those submarines to try and take the blockades down, but it's going to be a back and forth over several years, right? Now, another big thing about it is how do you win this war of attrition? You use propaganda to try and keep people's hopes up, right? Now, propaganda is going to be the use of spreading ideas to promote a cause. Now, you know them very best as being like posters, right? Be patriotic, sign your country's pledge to save food, right? Or also it would demonize the other side as well. Propaganda would encourage men to join the cause and fight for their army. A very, very famous one that's one of my favorites that will be on your test is a man is sitting by a fireplace and his son is playing with toys on the floor and his little daughter is sitting on his knee. And she looks over and says, Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? And he's just looking at the viewer, breaking the fourth wall like, I did nothing. What are you going to say to your child when they ask you what you did during the war, right? Now, the other big thing about it, though, is it's also going to promote rationing, and citizens are going to be like, So the biggest thing about it, or promote rationing so citizens will live scarcely so they can actually send a lot of that food to the fronts as well, okay? So this right here, of course, sign your patriotic. Now look, you would also demonize the other side as well. Destroy this mad brute. This is King Kong, which was a very famous silent film at the time, and he's wearing a German uniform, right? And also written on his club right here, it says Kultur, which is literally German for culture. And this woman, this fair maiden, taken in the claws of this monster. Look at her dress, y'all. She's the Statue of Liberty, right? So, it's the idea that if we don't go over and enlist in the military and destroy the brute who is the Germans, then they're going to come over, step foot on American soil, and they're going to take everything, including our liberty, from us, right? Dig for victory. Grow your own vegetables in these little victory gardens that kids would actually have in these different little elementary schools during World War I. Now, all of this stuff that I'm showing you is mostly American, and we're not in the war yet, as you already know. But the thing about it that you need to understand, though, is regardless of how many the blockades are going to affect this, but regardless of propaganda, this war is very hard on people, right? You have to understand, in particular, morale is going down swiftly, okay? In the early 1900s, morale is plummeting during this war. Now, what is morale, right? Morale is a group's feelings towards a war, right? How do you feel about it and stuff like that? Well, morale is collapsing for civilians and armies everywhere, right? Due to the fact that these blockades are restricting food access. The numbers of men dying on the front lines is getting crazy high. By midway through the war, by about 1916, Germans are drafting boys as young as 15 years old to go off to the front lines. England and Germany are going almost bankrupt. The stalemate is causing food shortages. Blockades and failures in battle are leading citizens to hate this war on both sides. And so you're seeing a massive set of riots break out in the streets. Protests everywhere demanding more food, peace from the war and getting away from this war completely. Right here, this is actually a picture of a hunger riot that actually broke out in Germany. They actually destroyed a butcher shop in Germany to try and find as much food as they could get their hands on. And this right here is a German-owned store in England. And as you can see, it's being attacked by regular English people because it was owned by a German person, right? So literally, morale is at an all-time low. But we're going to talk about how that's going to affect some other countries going into this next flip and into our next class. We're going to talk about unrestricted submarine warfare, and we're also going to talk about Russia, okay? But I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.